So Nvidia's RTX 4080 16GB is coming very soon. I'm going to tell you exactly when, what to expect. Is it going to be sold out or not? Are people going to buy it? What is the price going to be? And should you even buy it? Now, this is kind of controversial. First, let's just start with when is it coming? It's going to be coming out this Wednesday, November 16th. Now, stores are already posting, different advertisement for it. There's going to be like, influencers at Micro Center. If you're near one, that's likely you're going to be your best bet to even get one. They're going to start opening the doors at 9 a.m. Eastern, and that's when you can pretty much expect this GPU to go on sale, for example, on Newegg, Best Buy. It's been very difficult to get it online. When the 4090 came out, for example, within 5 to 10 minutes, they were all pretty much sold out. But the people that did line up at Micro Center, if you happen to have one within a few hours drive, it may actually be worth it, were able to pick one up. Here's one thing to keep in mind. We don't know what the stock is going to be like for the 4080. Is it going to sell out during the first day? I think yes. From what we've seen from the 4090, a more expensive GPU, it sold out very, very rapidly, and even when it restocked occasionally, it sold out pretty much everywhere. There is a bit of a caveat though. If you're not in the US, like in Europe, all of my viewers tell me that they do find them in stock, but the price is way too expensive. It's typically going to be considerably more than the US price, which to them, to the people in Europe, actually seems pretty cheap. Even though it is expensive, it's cheaper because it's actually just cheaper than their price, but obviously it's still expensive. So in Europe, it's going to be much harder to at least get, day one allocation. But eventually, if the pricing stays kind of high, you can actually get one depending on the store that you go to. But at least in the US, from my experience, if you want to make sure you get an RTX 4080, you should go there the first day. That's generally when you're going to be able to get them much, much easier. That's when they release the most amount of stock at once. So the 4080 is pretty controversial. Now, the 12GB model was canceled by Nvidia, and as we spoke about before, that's most likely going to be re-released as a 4070 Ti. So you don't have to worry about that one for now. We'll worry about that one when it's released as a different GPU. For now, we have the 4080 16GB. The good news here is if you bought a 4090 already, this GPU is of absolutely no interest to you because it's going to be everything the 4090 is and a little bit less. Now, this generation, you're going to have a little bit less performance than traditionally versus the top GPU. Here's my point. The 3090 was actually fairly close to the RTX 3080. Yeah, it still had a lot more GBs of VRAM, don't get me wrong, but it didn't make nearly as much difference as the actual performance of the GPU. They were very similar when you talk about the traditional frames per second performance rasterization. That certainly is not the case right now with the 4090 versus 4080. Independent reviews are not out yet. They're probably going to be out right around release or maybe a little bit before. So we're taking Nvidia's numbers here and also their specs. The specs of the 4080 considerably less than the specs of the 4090. And from Nvidia's own performance graphs and performance numbers, we can clearly see that the 4090 is just on a completely different level than the 4080. Of course, you would expect it to be it's the top performing GPU, but my point here is it's just a bigger gap than you're used to from last generation between like the 3090 and the 3080, for example, which is even a little bit stranger because the 3090 was just as expensive almost as the 4090, coming in at $1499. Merely $100 cheaper, but the 3080 was a whole whopper of a difference. It was $699, which is definitely less than half the price. The 4080, however, is not $699. In fact, it's not even $999. It starts at $1199, and this is one of the other problems with the 4080. You see, the performance gap is larger versus the 4090, but here's the kicker. The price itself is not large at all. It's actually a fairly small margin. If we take a look at the 4080 Strix, that's already $1549, which is just $50 shy of the cheapest 4090 at $1599, which is pretty incredible if you consider even the cheaper 4090s basically perform just as well as the more expensive ones. A lot of it comes down to maybe the cooler or noise or aesthetics. Like Like if you compare the Strix versus the regular 4090, for example, some of them, the Founders Edition, even perform better and technically are a better GPU than some of the more expensive ones. So as you can see, the RTX 4080 pricing is so close to the 4090. So that's why I would say for most people, now this is where it's going to get a little bit tricky because availability is a problem for the 4090. Let's say ideally, if you can find them for the same base price, or even in the real world, if you were going to go for one of these like beefier 4080s, like let's say if you wanted to get one of the nicer, maybe the tough, or maybe even the Strix at 1549 for the 4080, I would tell you, forget that. Just save up an extra $50 and just buy a base 4090. You don't even need the Strix 4090 or one of those crazy ones. You just get maybe a few $100s more than one of the AIB 4080s, which overall is just going to be a much better performing GPU. Even a base 4090 versus the best 4080 will be absolutely no competition. But of course, that would be in an ideal world where you could actually find them in stock, especially the 4090. Given that it's much more difficult to actually find them side by side, we don't know what the stock levels of the 4080 will be, but you can assume it's going to be sold out for a decent amount of time, just like the 4090 was. But let's say if you're one of these people, day one at Micro Center, sometimes they do have shipments of other GPUs, and you happen to want one of the higher end 4080s, but they happen to have a 4090. Maybe it's like a Zotac or an MSI one or something like that. I still think you should go for that 4090. If you're going to be spending that much money, almost $1,300, $1,400, $1,500, might as well go for a few $100s more and get the 4090. You're just going to have a much better gaming experience, even compared to a nicer 4080. But since in the ideal world, the reason why they're pricing these 4080s so high is because they can really get away with it, because the 4090 is just pretty much sold out, especially here in the US. Difficult to find one unless you go on the secondhand market and pay a scalper. So your real life choice actually ends up being a more expensive 4080 or a much more expensive 4090 if you have to go on the secondhand market. So then you may think, oh, you might as well just go and get one in the store at MSRP, even if it is an expensive 4080. But even with that, I'm going to tell you guys, avoid the more expensive 4080s. You're not going to get that much of a performance uplift versus a cheaper 4080, but you will be paying a tremendous price more. And if this isn't really the GPU to be doing this type of, exaggeration with your money, if you really want to just blow money on a nicer GPU, like I said, get the 4090. The 4080 at $1,199 is already expensive. You definitely do not want to add $350 on top of that for something like the Strix for almost no reason. But you'll be getting very little benefit aside from the aesthetics, because if you really don't care about the high cost of that GPU, like I said, once again, go for the 4090. That's the GPU for people that don't care about the price. If you're getting a 4080, that means that either you weren't able to get a 4090 or you're a little bit more price conscious. You want better performance, but you don't need the absolute fastest one. So that makes my point very clear. Get the cheapest 4080. Even if it is a janky Zotac or a Gigabyte or something like that, it's still going to be better than if you spend almost 4090 money without getting the 4090. You guys see my point? So having said that, is it a GPU you should even entertain when AMD's RDNA 3 is going to be coming out next month? Now, that's a very tricky decision. We know the 4090 has probably no equal in terms of performance, and its higher price reflects that. AMD themselves have admitted that the 7900 XTX, their highest end GPU with an MSRP of $999, is really targeting the 4080. Now, the same way that we're seeing AIB 4080s at almost $1,600, you can bet that the reference model 7900 XTX certainly will be $999, but the AIB models like from Power Color and things like that, those are going to be much higher in price. We're not sure how high AMD partners are going to really jump these GPUs up to, but if I saw them near what the pricing of the 4080 is for AIB models, I certainly wouldn't be surprised. I don't think they're going to go as high as like $1,400 or $1,500, but you never know for some of these saucy glossier models, but you can definitely expect, I think, at least $1,200. After all, I don't really think they're going to put just a $100 premium on the AIB models, especially since a lot of people are anticipating the 7900 XT, and of course its bigger brother, the XTX. So you can bet these are going to have a nice premium on them, because the third-party AIBs, if they showed us anything from AMD Radeon, RDNA 2 GPUs of last generation, they will definitely pump those prices up to take advantage of sort of the market demand. And as I've said before, AMD has much less market share than Nvidia does. You would think it would be logical for them to price their GPUs at a lower price, so then gain more market share when Nvidia can't sell theirs because it's sold out. But it doesn't work like that. Usually, since they have less market share, they actually pump their prices up because they sell out much faster, and they don't have to worry about sort of the same volume numbers that Nvidia does. So it ends up being a little bit counterintuitive. So definitely we hope that it changes this generation, and AMD definitely highly anticipated. Who knows? We're going to see what the performance numbers are. For those fans of Nvidia, remember, it's coming out in 2 days, 4080 16 gigabyte. For better or for worse, it is going to be the second best performing Nvidia GPU for now. And then you're going to have to wait until next month to see if AMD can actually swipe that crown away. All right, guys, so let me know if you're planning on buying the 4080. Are you going to line up and wait for it at one of these local stores? Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.